Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Apostate of Mind Podcast. I'm Mark Peralta. The New Testament Synoptic Gospels seem to suggest that Micah 5:2 from the Old Testament is prophecy that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem and that therefore Jesus, being born in Bethlehem, fulfills that prophecy. However, there are many academics that, upon doing a critical examination of Micah 5:2, it seems like it's not necessarily indicating that the Messiah would be born specifically in Bethlehem, but rather that he just might come from King David's line and from whatever that heritage is. That's it. Furthermore, there are some issues among the New Testament Gospels, namely John, that seems to read like perhaps Jesus was not born in Bethlehem, but rather in Nazareth. So there's a lot of confusion here. And so to help us better understand what the Hebrew text is saying and how Christianity might be misapplying Micah 5:2, Rabbi Moshe Shulman, our expert in the Hebrew Bible, is back. So let's all listen to Rabbi Moshe Shulman.
The next one we're going to talk about is Micah 5.
They claim the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem.
Correct. Okay. Now, this is actually in Matthew 2, 5 through 6. So this is a very important thing to recognize, that it's not just that some Christians came across this idea and tried to push it. We know that it's something that, in fact, was, the New Testament proposes it. Now, yeah. Right. So let's first look at the verse itself. Let me bring it up in front of myself while we're talking. I'm going to read it first as it appears in the translation that I use most, which is the JPS version from 1917. So let's read the verses. I'm going to read the first. In the Jewish, it starts actually in verse 1. The Christians, it ends up being verse 2, but okay, that's dummy. Okay, but thou, Bethlehem Ephrathah, which are little to be among the thousands of Judah, out of these shall one come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from ancient days. Therefore will he give them up until the time that she who travaileth hath brought forth. And the residue of his brethren shall return with the children of Israel. And he shall stand and shall feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall abide, for then shall he be great unto the ends of the earth. And there shall be peace when the Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces. Then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes among the men, and they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod with the keen-edged sword. And he shall deliver us out of the Assyrian when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our border. And it says that then the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many peoples, and it talks about that. Okay, so this is clearly, by the way, we have to clarify here one thing for sure. This is clearly messianic in that it is talking clearly about what's going to happen when the Messiah comes. Okay, so it is about the Messiah. That's not what the question is here. The question is talking about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. Now, let's look at what the KJV says about this. Okay. Let's read 5:2 there. But thou, Bethlehem, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, out of thee shall he come forth unto me to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been of old, from everlasting. Okay? And essentially he talks about the same thing. So they're similar. The only difference between the two is it says in the JPS from days of old, and in the KJV it said from everlasting. That is used by some as a proof that the Messiah is supposed to be deity because he's eternal. Okay? We'll discuss about that at the end. But let's deal with the first issue about the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. Okay? There is a number of problems. First, we have to go back to what actually does the verse say? Okay? If we look at the KJV doesn't say that the Messiah, that he's going to be born there. He says he shall come out of. Now, the Hebrew word used there, mimcha li yaitzai. From you will come out to me. Yaitzai, the word yaitzai means to come out. So the question we have to ask is, does the word yaitzai, come out, mean to give birth, to be born? And the answer is no. Okay? If we look here, there's a number of good examples. The yaitzai, go out, means essentially what you would expect. When you say you go out of X, whatever X is, the person who's going out was in X and is going out of X. So let's look at Genesis 28:10. In Genesis 28:10, the verse says this, and Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. The verse says, the Yaitzai Yaakov Beersheba. The Yaitzai, the same word, the Yaitzai, and he went out. Jacob went out from Beersheba. So it means he went out from a city. When you use Yaitzai with a city, it means somebody traveled out. Mm-hmm. Okay? He had been in the city of Beersheba, and he went out of there. It's very simple. Now, in truth, sometimes we do use it to describe the act of birth. So if you look in Genesis 25:25, we see it says this, referring to how Esau was born, and the first came forth ruddy, all over like a hairy mantle, and they called his name Esau. It says, V'yaitzai Horishan, the first one came out, saying, trying not to be too graphic here, but saying that the Esau came out of his mother's womb. He came out, okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, doesn't say he was born. It means he came out, describing physically exactly the action of going out. Okay, right. It does not mean to be born. There's in fact a word that means to be born, which is used all over the place. The word is yaled, and if we take a look, let's look at one of the many, many, many examples we could use. Genesis 4, verse 1. Where we see, and the man knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. Bore means to give birth. There the word is v'taha, and she became pregnant. V'teled, and she gave birth. Okay? The word yaled, or teled, which is the future tense, just means to give birth. Okay? Yaitzai does not mean to give birth. So the verse doesn't mean that. So here we have an interesting problem now. If we look at Matthew 2:5-6, it says quite clearly, and they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and thou Bethlehem, the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people. Okay, governor, it's fine. Translation's fine. I'm not worried about that so much. Mm-hmm. But the question is, that's used to say that he was born there. But that's not what it says. I've been to Bethlehem. I've come out of Bethlehem. Coming out of Bethlehem just means that they came out of Bethlehem. Mm-hmm. And in fact, not only does the verse not say that he was born there, it came out. It could have been saying that, the Messiah is going to be living there. That's what's saying. We actually have no historical evidence that anybody ever believed such a thing. For example, Josephus brings a number of people who claim to be the Messiah. Not a single one of them claimed anything from Bethlehem. 100 years later, during the revolt against Hadrian, Bar Kokhba was declared king and was thought possible to have been the Messiah. Nothing about being born in Bethlehem. In Jewish history, there have been many people who've claimed to be the Messiah. There's a famous one that the Maimonides wrote a work called The Letter to Yemen. The person lived in Yemen and he claimed to be the Messiah. When the Rambam, Maimonides, was writing to say that he can't be the Messiah for various reasons, he doesn't ever say because he never was born in Bethlehem or ever visited the city. Mm-hmm. Never. So what is the meaning of this? Well, we all know that David was born in Bethlehem. He left later on to live in Jerusalem, which from the time he lived in Jerusalem, the name of Jerusalem was also called Ir David, the city of David, which is Jerusalem. That's, by the way, a mistake in Luke. We could talk about that mistake sometime. Luke says that they had to go to Bethlehem because it was a city of David, their ancestor. It wasn't David's city. It wasn't the city of the royal family of David. During all the period of the kingdom of Judah, once David settled in Jerusalem, it never was. David was born in Bethlehem, but that wasn't the city of David. And if you go to Israel, you will find a place there. You'll see a sign that says Ir David. It's a place by the old city. It's called the city of David. Go there, you'll see it. It's called Ir David, the city of David, because the city of David is Jerusalem. So Luke got it wrong.
And that's where his palace was and everything, right?
Yeah, the city, it became called the city of David because David built it, essentially. He built up the city of Jerusalem and became the capital of Judah. And he was the one built it. And it was called afterward the city of David. When the Tanakh refers to the city of David, it always 100% of the time refers to Jerusalem. Luke got it wrong. Okay.
In Bethlehem, is that the house of bread or something like that?
Yeah, that's what it means. I don't know the source of the name, but it was called Bethlehem. It's not far from Jerusalem. It's like a drive about 15, 20 minutes. The tomb of Rachel is there. I've been there a number of times, so it's not very far from it. But it's not the city of David. The city of David is Jerusalem. Bethlehem is away from there. If you were to travel there, by feet, it would take you a number of hours to get there. Okay, so it's not far, but it's not near by car. It's not, depending on traffic. It depends on how hard it's getting. But again, the city of David is Jerusalem. But David was born there. So when it says that from that city somebody came out, it's referring to the fact that David came out of the city. That's where the rulership, the house of David, has its source in the city of Jerusalem. We have something similar to that. In Isaiah 11, it refers to the Messianic king, the son of David, as Shoresh Yishai, a root coming from Jesse. Jesse was a Bethlehemite. Okay, he lived in Bethlehem. Okay, that's why David was born in Bethlehem, because his father was a Bethlehemite, and Bethlehem was in the area of the tribe of Judah. So he was a Bethlehemite, and so David came out of that area. That was where he came. He was born in Bethlehem, and he came out of there, just like very similar to what it says there in Genesis 28 about Jacob coming out of Beersheba. David came out of Bethlehem. That's all it's referring to. It is messianic, but that's all it's really referring to. Now, again, if we read some of the things that it says in Micah, 5, especially look at verse, what's supposed to be going on there. So, for example, it says in verse 3, in the majesty of the name of the Lord, and they shall abide, for thou shalt he be great unto the ends of the earth. No, even until today, Jesus is not great to the ends of the earth. There's lots of places that don't, know him or acknowledge him. And certainly in his lifetime, that never happened. As we pointed out again in Tanakh, you get one chance and it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And that's all there is to it. So Micah 5:4 sort of excludes it even referring to Jesus having fulfilled it. Although the Messiah will, of course, come from David, who, as we've seen before, is a son of David, and David came out of Bethlehem. That's the simple meaning of what it says there, telling us in Micah 5:4 that the eventual Messianic king, he is somebody who came out of Bethlehem, meaning he was King David, David's descendant. Now, let's talk about this creative translations here that we have from the KJV.
And just for my audience, we have an episode also where we talk about the trouble that Matthew has to go through to place Jesus in Bethlehem,
right,
while maintaining his reputation of being one known to be from Nazareth.
There's all kinds
of how they differ with Luke.
Luke is the worst egregious thing, because the census is just totally bizarre, because right. We don't know of any census at that time. We don't know any census at the time that had the kind of thing where somebody would have to go back to where his ancestor of almost 1,000 years ago lived. Not 1,000, 500, 600, 700 years ago, where King David. We know of no kind of census where you had to. Yeah, there were census in Egypt, for example. We had to go. Let's say if I was in Chicago, okay, and there was a census, they would say, okay, you have to go back to New York to fill out your census papers. You can't do it in Chicago. You have to go back to, that was not unusual, okay? You would have to do it. So in Egypt, you had to go, okay? That kind of a census, we know a few examples of, but never a census that you had to go back to an ancestor from many, many, many years ago. Okay? Such a thing is totally unknown. But Luke mentions that he had to go to Bethlehem because it was the city of David, which of course is false, and the whole concept is just bizarre. How it actually comes about, I have no idea. That it's not true is one thing, but how it comes back is, anybody's guess. So let's look. I want to look at again the translational difference in what in the Hebrew is 5:1 and what is in the KJV in 5:2. Now, the end of 5:2, this is what the KJV says again. Okay? Out of thee shall come forth unto me to be a ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. Okay? Mm-hmm. The word everlasting is, I want you to remember that. That's how the KJV translates the words I'm going to give you in Hebrew in 1 second, everlasting, in Micah 5:2. Okay? Now, in the JPS, okay, they translate the words as from ancient days. Now, the word in Hebrew is mimai olam. Mimai olam. Okay? Mm-hmm. Just want you to know, mimai olam. Mm-hmm. Now, the KJV, in the whole Tanakh, that expression, mimai olam, appears 5 times. One is here. So what I did is, I know what the Hebrew means. It means from ancient days. It means, but long time ago. So, George Washington was president mimai olam in ancient times. Okay, he had been beforehand the president of the United States. So, 200 years, I guess, is enough to call ancient previous times. Okay, yeah. Appears 5 times in the Tanakh. This very expression, 5 times. Okay. I just want to look at how the KJV translates it. Okay? 5 times. First one we're going to look at is Isaiah 63:11. Okay? 63:11. Here's what he said. Then he remembered the days of old, Yomei Olam, Moses and his people. Okay? Now it talks about them rebelling, and they remembered Moses and his people.
Yeah, and it's the same phrase in the Hebrew.
Not the exact same word. Okay? Amos 9:11. And talking about, it's a beautiful thing. In that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen. It's talking about Messianic period, by the way. And close up the breaches thereof. And I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old. Mm-hmm. This is talking about rebuilding it as it was in the time of when David first built it up. The days of old at that time he's talking about. Yomei Olam, the days of old. Yeah. Doesn't mean eternity, the days of old.
It has a different prefix, but that's because it's describing it as in the days of old.
Prefixes in Hebrew are basically prepositional phrases usually. Mm-hmm. Okay? Let's go to the next one. Malachi 3:4. Malachi 3:4. Here's what he says there. Then shall the offering, talking about the Messianic period again, okay? Then shall the offering of Judah and Jerusalem be pleasant unto the Lord as in the days of old, as in former years. Again, Yomei Olam. What's it talking about? It's talking about that the temple will be rebuilt, and it will be just as it was in the old days when the temple had existed in the first place. Talking about historical period of time. It's not talking about eternity, historical period of time. Okay? The final one is Micah 7:14. Micah himself uses the same expression in another place. And what he says, Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old. Excuse me. Again, Yomei Olam. As in the days of old. The KJV has no problem translating it correctly when he has no theological bone to pick. Okay, but when he has a theological bone to pick, the KJV has no problem changing the meaning of the words. Basically, no respect for the biblical text itself, changing it in order to its theology. Now, I'm not given to exaggeration, but I think the two examples we've shown today with the Lord our righteousness and this shows that the KJV is unreliable unless you can look into the Hebrew text itself and see what he's translating. When it gives, especially with the idea of the deity of the Messiah, you have to be very careful and look at what the Hebrew says because he's falsified. He's falsified a number of times. Okay?
Okay. So for our last one for today, this one is one of those so-called Messianic prophecy. And I think you and I both agree on this one. This is definitely not a Messianic prophecy, but we're going to cover it because it's so common. And that would be the Messiah would be born of a virgin, quoting Isaiah 7:14.
Yeah, 7:14 is not just a supposed Messianic prophecy, which we're going to get into and show why it's not, but it's a significant one because the virgin birth, which it claims to prophesize, is significant in both the book of Matthew and the book of Luke. So it's a doctrine. Now, remember what I said earlier before is when you have something like this, a doctrine, just like we showed with the prophecies in Jeremiah 23, 33, and Ezekiel 34, 37, where we see the Messianic, the picture of the Messiah and the Messianic period very clearly described and easily verifiable. The question always has to be when a Christian is going to say, hey, this is a prophecy of such and such a doctrine. The question is, well, how many times does this doctrine appear in clear form, just as we have 23, 33, Isaiah 30, Ezekiel 34 and 37? How many appearances of this do you have there? And you'll find that they'll basically, the mouths will be open, but you never get, or you get a verse which you really have to do some kind of gymnastics to make it, seem to mean what it says. So I want to hammer that home very much because I want to give a contrast between what the Tanakh actually says in prophecy in the Tanakh and what the Christians have to invent or read back into or distort back into the text. Mm-hmm. Okay? These prophecies are not proofs. What they are is basically self-affirmations of what the New Testament's claiming to begin with, which has no proof for it.